We are very fortunate to live alongside the River Wye, which is a designated SSI and an area of outstanding natural beauty. It's therefore important for us as landowners and custodians of the land to make sure the river is in such a health and condition that it actually thrives for fish, wildlife, and the environment. At Townsend, we have about 2.5 kilometres of river frontage, which is about 1% of the total length of the River Wye. So that's the influence we have here at Townsend. My next door neighbour, Mr. Paul Scudamore, has kept environmental records of his farm, which obviously can copy across to our farm in terms of the weather conditions. And one thing he shared with me just recently was looking at the precipitation levels. And what's really interesting is in the last 20 years, we've had far more weather or extreme weather events than we had in the previous 70 years. So, proof to me that climate is actually changing, and it's something we've got to be very mindful of. These are some pictures, believe it or not, of Herefordshire during the winter. And it's some really tragic looking photographs with coloured water running off fields. That's your asset. That is soil, and also rich in nutrients that you've applied, you've spent money on, farmers have spent huge amounts of money on, and literally losing their asset down the drain. It can't be sustainable, and it's not healthy for either the farm or the environment for which all this nutrition and soil ends up in. This is a photograph of my wife, which was a bit of a wake-up call to us when we started walking around the farm looking at field margins that we established in 2003. And what we were starting to notice is that the field margins, believe it or not, had a huge height difference to the field that was continued in arable production. And this is quite scary in terms of how much soil we're actually losing. The next photograph shows pretty much why, and this is the exact same field, showing some pretty horrific erosion damage. So what I actually did is take a spirit level and measured the amount of erosion that occurred between the field margin and the field itself. And interesting enough, in just those 16 years, we'd lost nearly 400 millimetres of soil. If we believe that weathering of bedrock creates soil, then there's a real wake-up call that in actual fact that soil would generally take 1,400 years to rebuild. This is another photograph just showing how the arable bit in the far back of the slide has eroded, yet the grass part, the grass down exactly the same time, obviously had stabilised the soil and caused no erosion at all. We've got to be mindful of the fact that healthy soil is something that is critical, and organic matter is something that regulates moisture in the soil. It's a very clever thing. It does more than just regulate moisture. It regulates nutrition availability and holding capacity too. The more organic matter you have in the soil, the more the soil will function in terms of drainage and also in drought periods actually releasing moisture to plants. So it's a very, very important thing. And one of the key points is just 1 kilogram of organic matter can hold 17.3 kilos of water. That's quite an amazing thing, really, and it's something we really need to build back into our soils and increase at all costs. So here's some slides that were taken of the uplands, basically showing overgrazing, which is typical of most of the UK these days, of the UK uplands. It's not just an upland problem, the problem is everywhere, but it stems from the uplands. And the problem being there's nothing to intercept the rain. The rain is just literally falling off the mountainsides and steep mountainsides at that, as you can see, all rushing down to watercourses, becoming massive problems. This is due to the fact that overgrazing causes lack of organic matter or organic matter breakdown. It also creates hard pans and prevents infiltration of the water and water storage. It's really important as part of the farming world. We need to actually stop this water just running off soils like this, because I can pretty much guarantee, come the other side of the year, these fields will be crying out for moisture due to drought conditions. So that's really problematic. We have water issues both in the summer and the autumn, drought or flood. Um, Really interesting just to show the peaks of these graphs of water reaching. This is in the River Wye, but just showing how fast water is now reaching the rivers and why flooding is such a huge concern and a huge occurrence these days. There is so much flooding happening because of the speed of the water coming down from the catchment straight into the watercourses. These are a few things off Twitter which I thought was very interesting. What I found amazing was the hydrometry staff gauged 700 tonnes of water per second under the old Wye Bridge in Hereford. I mean, if the previous record was 574, that's massive change. That was all to do with Storm Dennis and the winter we had in 2019. But things aren't much better in 2020 as I'm sat here and it continuously raining. So it's really important that we start looking and start understanding the amount of water that's starting to come down our watercourses due to climate change. And of course, a standardised picture, there were hundreds floating around, and they do every winter, of properties and businesses that are getting affected by water. Now, one thing we've got to be very mindful of is the fact that we take, as farmers, public money in terms of subsidies to grow food or protect the environment. And I say grow food, a lot of the subsidy these days is based around just owning land. I'm not sure a taxpayer that's living in this building and paying rates and everything else he needs to is actually that concerned with farmers owning land. They'd probably much prefer their taxpayer money going to a farmer to prevent this type of flooding event happening. This is our own farm at Townsend, taken from exactly the same place, and as you can see, the water level is just quite phenomenal, and the amount of floodplain that we live on at Townsend and how much flooding. But that doesn't mean to say we can't grow crops. We just need to mitigate the risks of flooding, and therefore it's part of our responsibility to make sure when the river floods, we're able to react and bounce back and grow pretty good crops, despite the fact the river is in flood. It's another one of our fields. It flooded 17 times. This is a field that we were doing a meadow recreation, water meadow recreation at that. It had plenty of water, as you can see. Amazingly enough, the earthworms kept coming back every time the water went down, recolonising, restructuring our soil, and the flower meadow itself absolutely thrived in the spring. So flooding isn't as terribly detrimental as one might always think. One of the biggest effects at the moment is pollution of the River Wye, and it's starting to become quite an aggressive topic in our area. There's lots of things happening, but the main problem with the pollution in the River Wye is that of phosphate. And that comes from two sources. As you can see, there's agriculture and there's basically water companies. But you can also see that whilst water companies are improving their release of phosphate into the rivers, agriculture, unfortunately, is the largest contributor. And this is a real problem, and it's a real problem, as the Hereford Times have pointed out, that the Environment Agency have actually seen 272 kilos of actual phosphate go into the rivers every single day. There are some serious problems for agriculture the proportion of phosphate from agricultural diffused pollution has increased, despite any efforts made by the NFU, Farm Heritage and the CLA. They're coming mainly off top-dressed fields, grasslands and arable production, and of course livestock units. So it's really, really interesting that as farmers we're actually doing a worse and worse and worse job of losing nutrients down the river and soil, considering they're things we're spending money on. A photograph just showing what happens to our soil. I think we're all very familiar with the dead zone that occurs in the Gulf of Mexico from the Mississippi Delta. This is something that's really starting to occur as well in the British Isles, and very much importantly, unfortunately, it's the River Severn, which is fed, of course, by the River Wye, that is becoming one of the greatest concerns. And as you can see around the UK, two big red dead zones are starting to become a real issue, and there's no surprise to me that they're both related to the influx of water from the Bristol Channel. Interesting enough, there are of course solutions, and this is a great photograph I've taken of regenerative farming and the runoff from that farm compared to a farmer that's what I would call doing conventional farming still after a rainfall event. So it's absolutely obvious that we can mitigate what is going into the water. And of course, attached to all those soil particles in the water are phosphates, are nitrates, are things that cling to those clay colloids. So not only is there soil going in there, there's all the nutrition. And of course, nutrition is causing the eutrophication of our river systems that are causing them to be starved of oxygen, which is causing huge problems to fish populations, invertebrate populations, and everything else that happens in the river ecosystem. Public money for public goods is something that's starting to come to the fore. It's really important, and I've mentioned it before, that actually what we're having to do and what we're having to start to consider is the fact that the public needs value for money. If they're paying taxes to farmers, what are they seeing? What are they getting in return? And this is just a graph to show that without a lot of support from our taxpayers, a lot of the profitability of farming is pretty much null and void, which suggests that actually they're farming in a way that won't make any money and is detrimental to the environment. So perhaps we need to look at a subsidy for storing water. So if we are to be paid and continue to be paid for subsidies, we need to provide the public with a service. So let's think about increasing organic matter through regenerative farming, the planting of hedges, trees and coppices that might intercept water. Of course, buffer strips to prevent any soil or water for that matter leaving any field boundary. To use animals to benefit of the countryside. There are ways of grazing, mob grazing, of establishing herbal lays, of doing things with animals that actually build organic matter, that actually protect the countryside. Animals are very much in the limelight of causing most of our pollution. That is because of the way we manage the livestock. The livestock can be changed. I liken it very much to the production of electricity. You can produce electricity through solar, wind and renewables, which is fantastic. But you can also produce electricity through the production or burning of fossil fuels, which is pretty horrific. Grazing of livestock can be the same. You can do it very well or very badly. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's not being done well. But there are methods and there are systems in which we can do things differently. Of course, the restoration of natural habitats and hay meadows down by rivers. Paying people to actually, in their most erodible lands down on the river meadows, perhaps pay them a suitable rate to restore these hay meadows. And then, of course, just to promote and provide a living environment for nature. How? Well, in actual fact, there is what what is termed as nature's very own hydrologists, and that is the reintroduction of the beaver. And it's something I'm more and more passionate about. Why? Well, first of all, it's the importance of these keystone species that used to live in the UK and British Isles throughout history until unfortunately they were hunted to extinction. Dr. Bob Payne coined the term keystone species, and it was these keystone species, and for those that have read the Serengeti Rules book or even watched the movie, it's a phenomenal idea and principle whereby there are certain species in any ecosystem that actually have the largest effect on every other living thing in that ecosystem. And beavers happen to be one, and it's something that really needs to be reintroduced back into the UK with no boundaries. There's a wonderful group of enthusiasts for beavers at the moment called Beavers Without Boundaries, and it's really important that we get in and support these concepts. There's two types of beaver, the Eurasian and North American, and they do slightly differ. I won't be reading all of that, but for those that want to come back and have a look, you can just pause on that part of that video. They're quite incredible animals. And they are absolutely built for life in the water. They are far larger than you might ever think, and they have an absolute amazing effect on any environment they're placed in. So, why do we want to bring back the beavers? Well, let's be honest, this is an emergency. Beavers bring back nature fast. Britain is the 29th most populated, nature-depleted country in the world. Economically rich, ecologically poor. And we can go on and talk about exactly what is happening. And I'll allow you to come back and to read through these slides. But there are lots of reasons why the importance of supporting these provisions is important. And places like the Nep Estate in Sussex and how and what they are doing. And for those that haven't read the book Rewilding by Isabella Tree, I would very much recommend that's being read. But in actual fact, I am very supportive of Chris Jones of the Cornwall Beaver Project. And I've been down to visit his Beaver Project twice and find his enthusiasm for the project and infectious. And the demonstration that he can show is just incredible. And I'll just talk you through very briefly some slides I've taken, photographs of when I went down, showing a dam. So let's talk about the fact that yes, they were native to Britain. They were hunted to extinction. Lots of fishermen believe there are many problems associated with beavers in terms of the salmon run. Interesting enough, they evolved alongside each other. There's a very good reason why salmon can leap. And they can leap over beaver dams very, very easily. And therefore, the pools that they're created are phenomenally good for where salmon would normally spawn. So what benefits do the beavers bring? Well, believe it or not, they slow the flow. That's probably the main function of what they do, is slow the flow. But by slowing the flow, it allows water to be cleaned because everything takes so much longer to go down through the pools. It's nature's natural filtration system. Of course, they're capturing huge amounts of carbon because this carbon that falls into the pools stays in an anaerobic state and that actually stores huge amounts of carbon. Reducing flooding, well, that's fairly obvious. If you're slowing the flow down, the peaks of floods, whilst you will always have extreme events, what this will prevent is the huge amount of very quick flash flooding events. It, of course, prevents drought because these pools hold water and allow the release of water far more steadily. And of course, the abundance of nature. If you provide slower flowing water, pools, and all sorts of things, and this has been proven time and time again, the ecological uplift is absolutely incredible. And this is basically a very great diagrammatic of exactly what a beaver brings when they come and bring essentially a stream back to life. They are very much water engineers, and they can save huge amounts of money in terms of their flood mitigation. And of course, healthy rivers mean healthy people. You know, walking along a nice river is something that's good for the spirit and good for the soul. It allows you to spot and see nature, and it allows all sorts of things to happen in terms of water extraction for our drinking water becomes far simpler method of actually cleaning up to deliver us clean, safe drinking water. This is a great slide just showing the beavers as that UK keynote species and all the effects on the biodiversity and the ecosystems. In the Knapdale Forest, these is where the beavers were introduced and what they produced and what and how they worked. It was quite phenomenal to see how and what beavers were actually achieving. And of course, like I said, their creation of ecology, increased waterfowl, fish, nesting sites, creation of wetland ecosystems, just phenomenal. Beaver dams and the photographs below are from Chris Jones's very own beaver project in Cornwall. And this just illustrates what a beaver will build and how and why they build it. And basically, they are building dams because they are far safer in water than they are on land. And therefore, by creating a dam, it raises the water level. The water level then allows the beavers to swim, to move throughout their own ecosystem without the fear of predation. And this is another infographic that shows basically how a beaver can take a very standardized river and convert it into an absolute massive an ecosystem. As I've mentioned before, the flood control, removing nutrients, pesticide and herbicide removal because of the slowing of the flow and all of the filtration that's going on. Denitrification as well. And that's been proven. The salmon and trout increase, and actually the very fact that they evolve together. Frogs increase, birds, the wetland creation, and of course meadow creation, because as these pools start to become silted up, they get higher and higher until the beavers move on, and that higher and higher silt then actually becomes what would normally be a new meadow. So you end up with meadow creation purely because of the beaver dam in the first place. This just goes to show, and I think the bottom right-hand picture is probably the most important picture here. These are the same weather event, same stream, one going into the beaver enclosure on the left-hand side, and the water coming out of the beaver enclosure. Quite a phenomenal filtration system. And of course, they build their lodges, and really important how they construct their lodges, and that's probably demonstrated far better here, and why they do it and how they get in and out of their lodges. Their carbon sequestration, quite a complicated slide, but just goes to show that actually it's been studied and realised that there's an awful lot of sequestration in all of these beaver pools, and it's something that's really important to add to the ecological impact of these beavers. Their diet, well, I was amazed by what they eat. Mainly wood, of course, and that, as we can see from the chewing of timber. but they will go through brambles and briars and things as if it doesn't exude any spikes or spines. They're incredibly sharp teeth, which is self-sharpening. They breed, and they're breeding successfully in enclosures in the UK. And Chris is very proud to show, if you've got enough time and patience, or if you happen to have watched Spring Watch on the BBC, his family of beavers thriving in his enclosure. And this is just a little bit again on the impact of sport fishing and why it's really important to understand that they're not a threat to our sports fishing, and can live together quite easily and quite well together. Of course, there's conflicts with humans. At times, depending on where they are, they can destroy trees and block up culverts, which cause storm waters to flood roads. But there are many ways of mitigating this, and one of them is tree protection. Interesting enough, Chris Jones is doing some demonstrations of how to protect trees. You can either guard them, and then they can't glue them with steel mesh. But easier is just to paint them with a latex and sand mixture, which makes them unpalatable when they try and put their teeth into them. They also have created ways of preventing flooding of areas and culverts by making a water flow device that basically takes water from the pond and pushes it through the dam downstream, which lowers, depending on where you want it and where you leave it, you can control the height of what you want in terms of pond height. Here are a few methods in which beavers can actually be mitigated and live with humans by moving and monitoring and preventing the blocking up of culverts and places which might affect human activity. So, my visit to the beaver project in Cornwall and Chris Jones was something that I would recommend anybody to get hold of Chris and see if they can have a tour themselves. It is very enlightening and well worth doing. Where's he based? Well, obviously Cornwall, down in Woodland Valley Farm. So we walked down through the beaver location, and there's the baseline stream and the beaver enclosure at the moment, because by law, beavers have to be kept in a secure enclosure. As soon as you step into the enclosure, you can start to see all sorts of exciting things happen. And this is right on the bottom of his enclosure, showing, the divergent overflow allows fish to actually move around the dam. So if salmon can leap the dam, of course, there's few other fish that can't. Well, these other fish can, of course, go round the wetland and streams that are coming round the side. The dam, caused by high rainfall, is being breached, and the beavers were currently repairing that dam and adding more sticks and twigs and logs to it. Interesting enough, the really important thing is there are higher velocity areas and low velocity areas. So between the dams, the stream can flow quite rapidly. That creates an ideal place for spawning fish, because obviously it's a gravel bed, whereas behind the dam it's very much silt build-up because of that filtration and settling. And therefore the two go hand in hand, and it's really important to think that in actual fact the very clean water being provided because of the dam holding back the silt and nutrition and pesticides is allowing the spawning areas and the more rapidly higher velocity parts of the stream much more chance of the eggs hatching and thriving. So when Chris first started with his beaver project, he did put a few fencing stakes into various parts, just to allow a place where the beavers could actually start to build a dam against, which they duly did. But it was soon became obvious that beavers were more than capable of creating their own dams. So, in actual fact, they were left to their own devices over and beyond the initial helping hand with some fencing stakes. The next picture shows, like I said, the experiment. He's got some wire mesh, but he's also got some trees painted with sand PVA, and it's rather obvious from that photograph that they haven't been touched by the beavers at all. In the middle dam, you can see how well that's working, and also from the base of that middle dam, a wide-angle view and showing that middle pool. Here's Chris himself being very enthusiastic with his staff, just full of wisdom and knowledge. On the right-hand side just shows a coppiced tree by the beavers that they've eaten off, instantly colonised by fungi, mosses and lichens. So in actual fact, it allows other species to become available throughout that wetland area. You can see here there's some bark grazing, and where in actual fact the beaver has almost cut that tree down, and you can see the ingress of the mosses and fungi. And the diversity throughout the whole enclosure was quite phenomenal. So this is a typical tree felling of a beaver. Just a really exciting thing for me to see how an animal no bigger than a Labrador has got the power in its teeth to actually drop trees, and this is about 12 inch, 30 centimetres in diameter. The beaver pellet on the right hand side, unsurprisingly, extremely fibrous. It was quite a surprise to see one, to be honest, and something that's passed through the digestive system of a beaver. And here's one of Chris's pond level control experiments, just for those massive people doubting the fact that we can't live with beavers. So it's really important that we demonstrate that there's ways of mitigating levels, river levels, and why beavers and humans can coexist. The quite exciting part of the upper pond and the beaver lodge, quite a large beaver lodge. I was quite surprised to see the size of it, and established in the middle of the pond on the island. And you can see what I think is quite important in the foreground of these pictures is where the beaver has done its coppicing or tree felling. Of course, there is regrowth of the tree. I mean, it's a very natural phenomenon that you cut a tree down and it begins to regrow. So in actual fact, it brings about new life too. I mentioned earlier about how important it was to have gravel areas for fish spawning and clean water. This is a great example here of a typical gravel-based, very, very clean, high-velocity part of the enclosure, and therefore providing ideal spawning habitat for fish. This is the video of my daughter who came and did her school project on beavers in the Cornwall Beaver Project.